economics, which is being talked about unit per unit. But as you go through it, do not get stuck on the various terms which are specific to economics. But look at the larger context, because remember, migration historically has been largely dependent on labor. And it was only during the Industrial Revolution and subsequent fourth when labor as a concept or as a unit, and with capitalism coming in, labor was defined, redefined, and various formulations of definition will get you to understand why there is this stress on labor, and why this labor movement is a large part of migration in terms of why do people move, what are these jobs that they are doing, why are they doing these jobs. Economics forms a bulwark of a lot of understanding. Okay, let me start the presentation. I have to go through a proper process. Are you able to see the PPT?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. So today we are talking about the classical theory of economics. And there are these, the current is the neoclassical theory. New means new, but this is the classical theory which was formulated as, industrialization had happened, capitalism was setting in. People were trying to make sense of a new world. Remember, every time there is a shift, and especially a major shift in the either means of production or in a new technology. For example, we are currently going through a major shift in terms of the way consumption is happening, production is happening. We are going through something called the information revolution. And the whole concept of labor itself is, new theories would need to come about, which would be marked different from all the theories which were looked at during industrialization and post-industrialization, because the way we look at labor today is marked different. So, without much ado, classical concepts relating to economic, labor, and employment. And again, I said, do not get stuck on the subject part or the economy part. Look at in terms of the larger, understanding of how this figures out in terms of the way labor would move, people would move, and inevitably migration and diaspora formation happens, because inevitably uh, everybody is looking at doing something, because unless you produce or you are able to generate a wage, because as soon as the whole world economy moved into a money economy, you needed money for various aspects of life, and that wanting that money made people migrate. Determinants of employment and wages in capitalist economy, difference between employment and livelihood. Let's start with, why do we need a theory at all? In fact, an economic theory is a set of ideas and principles. How different economic. So to make sense of the world, scholars in various disciplines bring out theories. Now, theories, understand one thing, are not perfect. Theories are basically how a scholar or an author or a philosopher looks at a particular problem and tries to make sense of it for others, for himself or herself, or for others. Depending on a particular role, economists may employ theories for different purpose. Some theories aim to describe particular economic phenomena such as inflation or supply or demand and why they occur. And again, why these the subject of economics need to be looked at or studied or understood is, you get a sense of why this is happening. So how the production is happening, or how do the wages change, and based on this, and as we had talked in a couple of the earlier units, labor in a capitalist economy is a unique resource, because unlike land and capital, labor is a proprietary of a human being. You can't take a human being out of labor. And yet the human being is a complex animal. He or she has emotions, he or she has uh, rationality, logic, irrationality, how he or she behaves. So that is the case. Other economic theories may provide a framework of thought that allows economists to analyze, interpret, and predict behavior of financial markets. Understand no theory is perfect, because inevitably, every time a theory is propounded, there will be people who, when looked at other situations, will say that these theories have these particular holes, and then a new theory comes in. For example, when we looked at the whole concept of development, initially development was understood in terms of an economic basis. A lot of people still think development is an economic phenomena. So we are a 5 trillion economy. We are really developing. But subsequently, people realize the fact that, because at the end of it, the quantity or the money does not make a difference. There are other factors, and then we had PQLI, HDM, Human Development Index, and so on and so forth, Happiness Index, and so on and so forth. Apply these stories to issues of occurrence, they observe to glean useful insight. Idea is to make sense. At the end of the day, everybody is trying to make sense of what is going around, and get others to understand why whatever is happening is happening. So, capitalist economy, remember, this is what typically happens post-industrialization. Industrialization, post-industrialization, when actually scholars or economists start studying what is going on. Founded on the principle of production for profit, society divided into two classes: capitalists, who produce, and the workers who main asset is physical and mental power. So capitalism is purely every time distinguished into two classes: the ones who owns the means, and B, who give labor to produce. And every time there is going to be capitalism, we are going to be talking about two classes. Now, classical economics, first major system of economics, origins and writings of William Petty from Quincy, ideas developed into a coherent framework by Adam Smith and David Ricardo. Again, you need to understand the context. Always in scholarly and academic pursuits, understand context. Also, there is an ideology which goes into the context. Also, it all depends on. That is why it's very important who has written this. Is there a particular political ideology, and what is the context of it? The concepts and structures classical and modern know to be fundamentally different from the now dominant neoclassical economy. So there is a fundamental difference. We will not confuse it. We will keep it as simple as possible. Keep focusing on aspects of classical. The economy, the whole concept of economy known as classical. Political economy, circular process of production generated. Now, the whole thing about economy is surplus. And we will see subsequently how this surplus is basically generated and counted. Commodities are good meant for sale. They are produced by means of, there is a way they are produced, and inevitably anything which is produced is meant for sale. So this marked the absolute disruption of the traditional way we understood things, because in the traditional way people used to produce things for subsistence, for their own consumptions. Now was the time when all commodities are goods meant for sale. They are produced by means of commodities held in stock from previous cycle of production and labor. If from the current year's production we set apart stock of the above-mentioned commodities required for maintaining production at the same level, what remains is a social surplus of commodities. So inevitably, in the means of production, there is always some commodities which is left, which will be used in the next cycle. Remember the fact that this is industrialization. There is a factory model. There's a conveyor belt. And production happens in cycles. So if you have seen any industry, or if you have understanding of any industry, there are shifts. There is a conveyor belt or a production belt, and everything happens in periods. So inevitably, when the when the next batch has to be produced, there has to be some raw materials from the current batch. And obviously, everything is, turned by labor. So labor becomes a paramount, cog in the whole wheel of, production. A part of this surplus is used for direct consumption. Now, production is happening. Production, whatever is produced, some is left for the next year, but whatever is left after we leave those things for the next cycle, what is that called? Is called surplus. Now, in this surplus, some is used for direct consumption by people as workers. Now, when we look at, we can, if we try and visualize the surplus, inevitably, let's look at the example of agriculture. So when a farmer grows some crop, after he harvests the crop, a part of the crop is used as seeds for the next cycle of, for agriculture. Once you remove that seeds, whatever is left is called surplus. Now, in the surplus, the farmer, what he will do, he or she will do, is first use something for direct consumption. Now, direct consumption is what he will take, he or his family will take, what his labor and the labor family will take, and so on and so forth. The other part of surplus comprises producer good, which is available for investment to increase the scale of production and therefore achieve agreement. Now, whatever is left after the subsistence is then used for investment. Basically, it is something for sale. The annual surplus of commodities over and above the needs for replacement of inputs is corresponding to the concept of GDP. So the farmer produces, is harvest. Some part of the harvest is used as seeds for the next sowing. Whatever is left, some part is taken out in terms of subsistence for the farmer, labor, etc., etc. Whatever is left is then sold, which then is used for investment or achieving economic growth. This annual surplus of commodities over and above the need of replacement of inputs, which includes the subsistence, is the GDP. So,
Sorry,
yeah,
it's this investment part that's considered the surplus, right? Like the third point, the investment to increase the scale of production.
okay. So now what happens is whatever is the produce which happens, this produce, part of it is taken out, which is used for use in the next batch or next cycle of production. Okay. Whatever is taken out for as inputs for the next cycle, everything which is left is the surplus. Aisha?
So how does that correspond to GDP? Because GDP is
gross domestic product.
yeah.
So inevitably a factory is producing, and you need to understand now when I'm talking about a farmer producing food grains, we will not say X tons of food grains is in terms of GDP. We will convert the food grains into monetary terms, because food grains into monetary terms, factory production into monetary terms, service produced into monetary terms, this is GDP. Asha?
Actual GDP is the goods sold, right? And the monetary value of like the sum of
GDP, what is the definition of
it's
GDP?
not surplus per se, right? It's because surplus may not be sold, right?
Correct. Aisha, this is the classical economy. We are what you are looking at is the neoclassical one. This got changed. I'm talking about the classical as it was brought about.
Okay.
Okay. Things have changed because there were a lot of lacunas in the classical economy theory, and which was subsequently replaced by the neoclassical. So don't get confused between what is exactly GDP. In the classical theory, whatever was the surplus, was considered as the GDP.
Okay.
Okay. And inevitably, even in the neoclassical, a large part has to do with the surplus. What is actually the surplus when you take out the input for the next cycle? So this surplus will determine how things move. We will see how this surplus comes over and over again in this PPT and in the whole unit. Aisha?
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Let's move further. All major questions of classical economic theory turns in the central notion of surplus. So now you will understand why in the classical economic theory, it was always about surplus. Remember, this was the time industrialization had hit. So this is industrialization, post-industrialization, when the economists were trying to make sense of how things were and how they were to be accounted. Aisha?
Yes, sir.
And how is this annual surplus generated, valued, distributed between workers, capitalists, and landlords, used in turn by the social classes, e.g., for increasing consumption or investment? So, whole thing was, as I said, people were trying to make sense of this new order. And the whole capitalist system was growing, so people needed to make sense of this. So it was all about, everything was about surplus. How categorization was based on surplus. The surplus in reality, heterogeneous bundle of commodities, each with known physical quantities, measurements. Attain the total size of the surplus, find way of reducing them to a single magnitude, means of prices of individual commodity. So how this surplus was accounted for or quantified was in terms of price of individual commodities. Because I cannot say that I have 5 tons of rice, 3 tons of wheat. How do I account for this? So a price mechanism was formulated that 3 tons of rice is this, 5 tons of wheat is this, 100 tons of steel production is this, and that's how this surplus was generated or was computed. The surplus thus accrued to society must somehow be divided. Now, once the surplus was accrued, how it has to be divided among the social classes participating in the process of production, workers, capitalists, and landowners. Finding the laws regarding regulating the distribution of social net product as different categories of income is the task of the theory of distribution. So another theory was brought in, the theory of distribution, as to how this distribution of surplus will happen. So first the classical theory looked at surplus, and then there was a new theory on the law of distribution. Economic growth is the basis for improving quality of life. Growth depends on how the social class use this income. The respective class income will be partly used to increase their present level of consumption and partly for investment. So the economists understood the fact that partly it will be used for consumption and partly for investment. So they were trying to figure out how, because based on this, then they were able to they were trying to figure out how should policy, at the end of the day, how should policy be formulated? How should state react? So there was a whole section of society like Adam Smith who believed in the fact that government in a capitalist model should not interfere. What was called the laissez-faire. We will come to this later. So there were multiple ways to understand this system and to see how this system should be rolled out. Investments in bringing more land under cultivation and irrigation, setting up new factories, new infrastructure will mean greater flow of production and therefore a growing size of surplus. Economic growth in turn will induce changes in institutional production, market income distribution. Continuous interaction between economic growth and institution is what we call development. What we call development as per the classic economic theory. Because inevitably at that time, most scholars believe the fact that development is economic. And inevitably, when the size of production and investment will go up or the economy will go up, inevitably development will happen. So that's why I keep saying understand the context. The context is industrial revolution. In context is a new field of economics. Understand the concept of the fact that capitalism system is taking roots and everybody feels that's the best system. And inevitably, economic growth and institution is defined as development. Now, let's look at some concepts on labor. Fundamental concept in economics, human element, no production without labor. Quantity of labor required in production of particular thing is more or less dependent on the technical method of production. Even if robots produce everything, there'll be a human labor. Why a particular thing is dependent on the technical methods? Because industrialization was introducing technology. The steam technology, the water technology, everybody got enamored with technology. If you notice, we have something similar which goes now, which says that everything is dependent on internet. Internet will do this, internet will do that, internet will change people, internet will change the means of production. Forgetting the fact that in the center point of all this is people, which is labor. And if you remember last time in the last class, which is what I was talking about, there is certainly something called a 360-degree circular motion of history, of things, of fashions. Everything goes circular. It keeps moving back and forth. Entire population falls into two groups. There are those who engage in production. Second group is dependent on the first. See, because remember, everything needed to be quantified for the classic economists to make sense of everything which was going around. And unless they could, reduce it and quantify it, they could not make sense. So if you see, labor will also get quantified, commodities will get quantified, because numbers is something very easy to manipulate and understand. The quality part is always difficult. So if I was to put human being and give it a quality, it's very difficult to kind of talk about growth or how do I quantify this concept? Because the whole concept of understanding growth is in terms of quantification, not quality. So I can talk about 3 feet, 5 feet, a growth of 2 feet. As soon as I quantify it, I am able to, make sense. So after labor, wage labor. Let's understand the concept of wage labor. Under capitalism, labor acquired a specific character which was known as wage labor. Labor under capitalism appeared as a commodity by itself. So unless it was commodified, they could not quantify it and measure it. Workers as a class do not own or otherwise command any means of production. And inevitably, remember, there's an ideology going behind it. Now the labor or the workers as a class do not command any means of production. Their ownership is confined to the capacity for work, physical or mental. Think about the fact that more often than not, every time you are told you have to do a job, essentially there is a narrative thing that you cannot produce anything on your own. You can only produce something in a job. A job is an institutional mechanism for working. Now, if you notice, cyclically, we are again back to producing on our own in terms of creative outputs. So the information economy is again back to individuals as a producing agent. The industrial economy talked about institution as a productive agent where all people had to join an institution or an industry or a workplace. And in the information economy, again, cyclically, people have become a measurement or a producer. So you are a graphic designer, you're producing things. You are a gig worker. A gig worker is obviously a part of the institution, but there is a large section of content creator. You are a producer of things. But we are still on the notion of classical economy or classical economic theory. Class with exclusive ownership in the means of production is the capitalist class. So capitalist class is who has the ownership of production. Sharp division means the workers must necessarily hire their service out to capitalists without which they cannot survive. So remember, there was a certain ideology behind this also. Because if I continuously keep having this narrative bit that the only way to survive is to do a job, you will inevitably do a job. At the same time, workers were not tied to a particular employer, subject to skill profile. They were free to enter into job content. Institutional conditions made for deep and continuous market. Because this institutional condition made for deep and continuous market for labor, they wanted to create a market for labor, a labor market as an institution. Because unless the labor market was not created, the industrial revolution would not have worked. The capitalist model could not have come. And that is why in the next unit, next week, when we will study Karl Marx, where Marx is talking about conflict between the classes. So this gives some amount of perspective as to how human beings or societies moved from, from the pre-industrial, pre-monetary, pre-capitalist model into the industrial, monetary, and capitalist model, and how things are unfolding. Because of its commodification, there is a generalization of labor which acquires a degree of basic homogeneity. Because once you have commoditized or quantified, there is a homogeneity. Employment in advanced countries is measurable in standards of unit of labor, which is million per person days or person hours. Once labor is referred as a definite quantity through commodification, wages as the price of labor is well defined. So Manrega talks about 100 hours of labor, 100 hours of work, which will be given to every rural worker who's willing to work in creation of assets. And then amount is defined per labor hour because labor has been commodified. If the labor was not commodified, how would you go about deciding? Then it would be a very... So inevitably, they were trying to objectify a subjective quantity. Both the size and then in labor employment, size of total employment and its distribution of sectors may vary from year to year. These were so many different permutation combinations that they had to somehow quantify it. In a year when conditions are unfavorable to agriculture, labor would shrink. If the country's export rise, there would be a surge in power, employment in export-oriented industry may rise. Thus, actual level of employment in the economy in a given period may well fall short of total labor available in that period. That phenomena is called unemployment. And then you look at the fact that when such a thing happened and unemployment rises, more often than not, labor will migrate. in search of employment. And that is why we see, labor chokes in cities, because the employment in rural areas have dipped. There is not enough employment. So people are migrating to urban areas for employment. For people from a country are moving outside for employment, because inevitably, if you are not able to generate employment, people will move. That is why economics, economic theory is to understand migration and diaspora. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense why we are studying so much of economy. In industrial economies, labor is employed through process of hiring by owners of businesses or their managers. Such hiring is facilitated by institution of labor market. Now, labor market is not a physical market. Expression of plans and expectation of employers and job seekers. What we typically use LinkedIn, what we use message boards. The job contract in each case would also include tenure and other aspects of employment. So in industrializations, there were employment boards. We still have employment boards in our country, though in today's information revolution, most of the jobs are done through Craigslist, LinkedIn, social media, which have become informal employment boards. Data on employment and unemployment regularly made available. Labor under capitalism is wage labor employment can be measured in standard person hour. Is obtained from employment exchanges through the job application link. So earlier, all job application needed to be made through employment exchanges. And then the employment exchanges would match the industry with labor. I repeat, we are still looking at the classical economic theory. This was started industrialization, post-industrialization. Things have changed a lot. Rate of employment expressed as the rate percent. We still, if you see a lot of times figures come out, unemployment rate, for example, in Haryana is 35%. How do they calculate? Let's not go into it. But it expressed as a rate percent is the ratio of currently unemployed person to total person in the labor force. Some of those currently employed as well as unemployed. Data on important attributes of employment and unemployment, such as the occupation, classification, education, so on, is published. This gives an idea as to how the country's economy is doing, how the industrial production is doing. And this will also give you an idea if there is a high unemployment rate, then there will be a social disorder. There will be discord, there will be disquiet. For example, Haryana has one of the highest unemployment rates. So let's look at wages. Wages are returned to labor. They are the payments the employed labor receives for expending their physical and mental energies, knowledge, skills, and experience in the production of goods and services. Again, quantification. Before the Industrial Revolution, typically things used to happen as a barter. So if you do work for somebody, you might receive your remuneration in terms of physical goods. With the money economy, it moved into wages. The money economy talks about wages. With that money, then you can do consumption, you can do investment, you can do saving. Wages cover, in addition to wages of production workers, salary. Now, wages are also not only the production workers, non-productive employees, office staff, supervisors, managerial, industrial model. There are all these people which add up. Perks, fees charged by independent professionals, royalty on books. Wages are integral part of employment contract. It would also include a host of social security benefits and entitlement. So when the wages are calculated, all these things are kept in mind. So now let's look at the labor market. A little bit concepts on the labor market. Important institution of labor in the capitalist economy is labor market. Remember, all these institutions were also created because if they were not created, the industrial revolution could not have progressed. The capitalism or the capitalist system would not have been able to operate. It is this institution that mediates employment and wages, economic quantity, economic price. The labor market is not a physical location. It's an institutional mechanism for gathering, processing, and disseminating information. So when we say today as a news item that unemployment is 35%, it means nothing to most of us. But let's say to a political entity, it might mean, for the government, it might mean they need to create so many jobs. For a political entity, it might mean that, the government which is working is not working efficiently. For a policy planner, it might mean now there is a possibility that, these people are ready to migrate, because unless, or what kind of investments need to be brought in, what are the social consequences of this unemployment, what needs to be done. So that is, inputs for policymakers. Information pertains to the quantities and qualities of labor required in different branches of economy, as also plans and expectation of job seekers. That is what the labor market does. So a good way to see rural unemployment is to go to a city's labor chalk and see what kind of people are there and from where they are coming. So if you do a general survey, if you go to any labor chalk wherever you reside, a labor chalk near your place, and do a small survey of 10 people and ask them from where they are coming and how long they have been, you will get a sense about what is the state of rural economy. Or you can get a sense of rural unemployment. Or you can get a sense of, whether it's a male migration or it's a family migration, what happens to the children, what happens to their education, how do they get health benefits. Labor employed is labor hired through labor market. Hiring process requires that the information is achieved.
Excuse me, sir.
Bolo.
Yeah, I can say if someone wants to see how the labor chalk works or how the things were happening, I can say there is one institution. It's a labor line. It's not an institution. It's somehow an app where they get lots of information regarding the job and all the things.
Okay.
And even if they have any conflict with the employer,
okay,
they also works on them too.
So this labor line app is giving employment information of what kind of labor, skilled labor, unskilled.
No, they were. I think it's unskilled labor.
It's only skilled.
But you can say like in unskilled. I don't know how to say, because the masons, lots of different categories were just connecting with them and they just solved their problems, but they were not very educated one.
Okay, so, let me look at this. So, technology is another way for information to be collated. Again, as I said, the labor market is an institution. Now, this institution can come out in the form of an app today. It can come out in the form of a website, but it is largely an institution in an abstract concept. One needs to understand that. What I was talking about in terms of research topics, a research topic on labor chalk typically gets you to understand why do people migrate. So if you are looking at writing a paper or tomorrow looking at a presentation, there are so many topics which can come out of a labor chalk. Physical, meeting people, interviewing them and figuring out what is happening. So the concept of labor market started with the Industrial Revolution in the classical theory. Also transmits information on contractual terms, number of specific kinds of jobs, offers and wages. Employment exchange via job application. Employment exchange, people would not hear of employment exchange now, but I think there are employment exchanges still working. There are some employment exchanges still working. Possibly in industrial towns, these employment exchanges are still working. They were working in Delhi. I do not know whether they're working now. I'm not sure about Gurgaon. I did know there was an employment exchange. I have no idea whether it's still working or not. You can check out in your area. Labor market mediates the quantity of employment. Wages does not imply that the forces shaping these variables exist within the market. So remember, market is an abstract context. It's like the institution of marriage. The forces which work on, shaping the various variables in the institution of marriage more often than not come from outside. The pressures of work, the long working hours, the movement or travel for work. These are forces which impact the institution of marriage. Similarly, labor market, there are forces shaping variables which exist outside the market. Full employment is not a necessarily outcome of the internal process of the labor market. In fact, history has shown that unemployment of varying degrees is a normal feature of capitalism. So that is how the classical economics or economists determined that unemployment is a normal feature of capitalism. There can never be a perfect situation where the market absorbs all people. So determinants of employment and wages, two key questions. What determines the level of employment in capitalist economy? What determines the level of wages in such an economy? So now the economists needed to figure out how does this employment vary and how does the wages vary? Because if you see, unless I'm able to, as an economist, I'm able to figure out some way of figuring out how the employment and wages figure out, I can never be able to bring out a policy prescription. Part of available labor cannot be hired. It has no means of production of its own to fall back upon. Under capitalism, a part of available cannot be hired. Now, it started with the assumption that now labor has no productive capabilities unless it comes in an institutional setting. Significant and chronic unemployment in such economies implies social and political instability and disharmony. So if labor is not being employed and these people cannot produce anything on their own, if there is unemployment, means there is social and political instability. And because wages are income of the labor, remember, the labor not only produces goods, but from the wages the labor gets from producing those goods, it consumes those goods. And as we had studied in earlier units, if the wages are too low, people will not buy those goods. So there has to be some way to determine, and which is what is happening today in India. There are these news reports which are coming that cars are not being sold, two-wheelers are not being sold, consumer durables are not being sold because the people, the middle class, do not have purchasing power. Why there is not purchasing power? Because there is high unemployment. But besides that, there is a sort of an inflation and taxes and so on and so forth, which is getting people not to have enough purchasing power. So you see how everything, each aspect of economy interacts with each other. If wages are universally low, the market for goods will be smaller. There will be no incentive for capitalists to expand output and invest in new production facilities. And as we are going through this slide, you will see how, which appeared so simple in terms of production, surplus, wages, now seems to look more complicated. Classical economic theory does not postulate a logical necessary relation between the level of employment and the level of wages. So now it does not even postulate any relation between employment and wages. In fact, it believes employment and wages are two different entities. So if you see now again, in the neoclassical mode, and in fact, in the current situation, irrespective of that, there is a large number of labor force which is available for employment, and there is high unemployment. The wages are still higher for the daily wager. The daily wages, employment wages have gone up because inflation is high. Classical economics regards employment and wages as two logical separate phenomena. Forces that shape the level of employment and wages are essentially distinct. No simultaneous determination of employment and wages. So you need to understand employment wages are separate. That's what classical economics does. Two circumstances shaping level of employment: method of production in use by capitalists, which determine the requirement of labor per unit, actual level of production in response to the aggregate demand for goods and services. Again, let me just stop here to tell, do not get stuck into various concepts of economics. We need to broadly understand that, it consists of production, it consists of labor, it consists of wages. And inevitably, a lot of times, how these operate are quite independent in terms of classical economy. They are trying to make sense of it. That's why the theory came about. They're trying to make sense of it because at that time, again, capitalism was just taking roots. Industrialization had started, and this is post-industrialization. The subject of economy had come in because people were trying to make sense of what is going on. And remember, the whole process of capitalism is about profits. The level of employment is the product of these two magnitudes. Which two magnitude? A, method of production, which determines the requirement of labor per unit of output, and the actual level of production in terms of aggregate demand. So in case the level of aggregate demand goes down, irrespective of the method of production, the number of people required will be less. Will the level of employment be necessary such that it absorbs all labor available and willing to work? Such a situation is known as full employment. The answer of classical economists is no. Even if the economy or an industry is able to absorb the whole labor based on the economic condition, still there never will be full employment. That is what the classical theory says. That's what the classical theory says, because inevitably, this condition will never be the case where the economy is in full blast, the level of production is in full blast. Remember, there is another factor. If the economy, Aisha, if the economy is in full blast and I can produce maximum, then there will be the profit motive whereby if I say I reduce one labor, if I put one labor less, I'll be able to make more profit because I will not give the wage, and every of my production will be taken by the market. Why should I spend in wages?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So there are, listen, at the end of the day, you also need to understand it's the human thought. And human thought, there is, there is multiple ways you rationalize and remember, the whole capitalist model is based on profit. So today, now, if you look at the fact, if wages start going high, what would a capitalist do? Would he reduce his profit? No. What he would do is he will transfer the cost onto the purchaser, which is what is happening now. As the cost of production has gone up, look at what Parle G has done. Parle G has kept the price of the packet same, but reduced the number of biscuits in it. And that's what everybody has followed. Because they could not increase the price of their product, they have reduced the quantity of their product. The price has remained the same. Because at the end of the day, the capitalist will not reduce his profit. That's the whole essence of capitalism. And that's where, the whole Marxism and Karl Marx came into being, which we will study in the next unit. It becomes a very interesting read to be able to understand why these things were happening the way they were happening. Unemployment can come about because of technical improvements in method of production, leading to a reduction in labor requirement. Or it can come about because of fall in aggregate demand. Or both these causes can reinforce each other. Remember, these are, everything is not an exact science in a particular way. There are many X factors which are at play. And that's the beauty of the world and life. For every time we plan and manage, there is always an X factor which comes in, which we have not accounted for. Look at the fact that when the world was, thinking it was chugging along, the X factor of COVID came. And suddenly everything went into a disarray. Okay. If we assume that the technical process in the method of production is gradual and a halting process, then it follows that fluctuation in the level of employment are directly related to fluctuation in aggregate. Remember, the demands also fluctuate. Why the demand fluctuate? It could be because, and also understand the fact that economy is also cyclic. There's always a rise followed by a slump. And these cyclic processes have been happening from history together. The way weather patterns are cyclic, everything is cyclic. Aggregate demand can originate from private sector, from government, or from foreigners. Something can happen. For example, during COVID, during lockdown, the demand suddenly went down. Wages per se have no direct or predictable influence on the level of employment. Unemployment, therefore, cannot be a direct result of higher wages, nor can low wages be the direct result of excess supply of labor. So again, the wage market follows a different model altogether. For example, as I said, today there is an excess of labor because of unemployment, and yet the daily wage is high. So what are the determinants of wages? We are already late. Three forces operating average level of wages, notion of subsistence wage, state of economy, state of social conflict over income distribution. And these three also get related to each other. I think I should stop it because there is quite a few things. And how this work, what you can typically do is, I think if there is any question, let me stop it here. Because otherwise, what you can do is you can send me a mail, I can send you the PPT. I've tried to simplify from your SLM because the SLM talks a little bit more, multiple concept. Oh, Abhay, chapter 30. The one is not working. So it's 13, not 3. My 1 on the keyboard is not working. So if you can send me a mail, I can send you the PPT. It becomes interesting because, if the wages, as I said, if the wages go up, then what happens? Is the capitalist reducing his profit? Is he transferring that money on to the customer? How does the government step in? Because the classic understanding of economics was the fact that the government should not come into the picture. The market should determine it, but we also realize the fact that the market can skew against the worker, and that is why as the worker unions became powerful, the wages started going up, and cyclic nature of economics made that the economy go up and go down. So you see, there are a lot of questions in the whole theory, and that is why there were a lot of criticism to the theory. The neoclassical theory came about. There are other Marxist theories, so we'll do a little. So what I will do is I will continue with this in the next class. We are already end of time. Let me switch on my video. Hi guys. So we'll continue this in the next class. Take a couple of minutes into a couple of slides in term. So essentially, you need to understand 3 things. There is wages, there is labor, there is an employment which is generated, and there is the concept of economy. And the concept of economy is determined on labor, the production, and the wages. And how these things move, again, do not get stuck in the economic part of it. If you have never studied economics, do not get stuck. Just understand the fact that when these 3 are fluctuating, or these 3 lead to social discord or unemployment, they will inevitably be factors which will lead to migration. That migration will lead to people moving internally or externally. If they move externally, then diaspora formations happen, or why people are moving. And that is where policymakers need to keep a track about the economics part of it, the employment part of it, why investment should come in, because that can lead to social discord. Any questions? I tried to keep it as simple. I hope I didn't complicate more than what was required. Guys, any questions?
Sir.
Gurpreet.
Sir, impact of artificial intelligence regarding requirement of labor, please.
Impact of?
Artificial intelligence, AI.
In terms of labor. So again, we need to understand, there is, if you look at the fact, technology is improving. Technology continues to improve from the Industrial Revolution. So when the computers came in, which were the natural consequences, and if you see, technology does not work bereft of society. Technology works with society. It always is. If you look at a child and the child's development, as the child starts to walk, the child starts doing complicated things, complicated maneuvers, because now the child is able to walk. Once the child is able to grasp and the mental faculties are developing, the child is able to do and understand complex things. Similarly, as the society develops, grows, the complexities of the society grows. With the complexity of the society, solutions are brought in, technology solutions are brought in to add value to this complexity of society. So, for example, as the human numbers increase and the complexities of countries increase, the need for census, the need to know how many people are there, how many males, how many females, how many immigrants are coming, to be able to make policy. Now, as complications are happening, the initial census was done on tabulators or calculators. Subsequently, you needed to manipulate numbers and computers started coming in. So you see, technology is following society. As the complexity of the society is increasing, technology is coming in. So now they are talking about the fact that human being is a peculiar resource because as we talked about, human being is directly associated with labor. Everything is produced by the human being. I, as a human being, is producing a manual as well as an intellectual labor. And you cannot take that labor out of me. But I am an imperfect animal because I need rest, I need to sleep, I can go down, I need to move out, I need to make friends. Now the capitalist system or the industrial system which was there needs to be more refined to make more profit. So they want to say that if human being and this imperfect labor animal is moved out and that is replaced by a technology being. Now the technology being a robot does not need to go to the loo. The robot does not need to have an emotional breakdown. The robot does not need rest, can continuously work. Now, with all that, they feel, a section of society feels that the production will increase and so will profits. Now, Gurpreet, what typically happens is when in India introduced computers, initially the trade unions were dead against computerization because they thought they will take away jobs.
Sir.
But with computerization, computers added ease to the work, but it produced new jobs because computer needed to be manufactured, they needed to be maintained, so on and so forth. So, for example, similarly with artificial intelligence. So, artificial intelligence can very easily do repetitive works, can glean insights and so on and so forth. But somebody needs to train the artificial intelligence, somebody needs to manage it, somebody needs to oversee it. So the work, different kind of work. So now the skill set of labor needs to change.
True, sir.
So more often than not, as technology changes, the skills, now what will happen is unless people are reskilled into new levels of technology, what will typically happen is you have a workforce which do not have the necessary skills for new work conditions. That will lead to a set of unemployment which needs to be managed by reskilling, or there will be a problem. For example, we have a lot of people in the higher bureaucracy who are not comfortable with computers.
Sir.
So, but that is the way society, every society, not only India, every society will keep moving. People will, and as society becomes sophisticated and complicated, new technologies will come. You would still need people to create, oversee, manufacture, think, ideate. And you would need to continuously need a set of people to reskill this old set of people. So, Gurpreet, Zoom came during COVID. It's not that it has moved all human interaction. The human element will remain the same. We would still feel to meet and talk to people. But now technology gives us a means of talking to all you in various different locations.
Sir.
Gurpreet, I hope I've been able to answer your question.
Sir, very nicely elaborated, please. Thank you so much, please.
Okay. Any other question? Any other question? Okay. If there is no other question, what we will do is next week, we will take unit 6, which is on marks. I will take a first few minutes in trying to finish this PPT, how these wages are determined. Again, as I reiterate, do not get stuck into the hardcore subject of economics. Understand, the basic elements. It's a very interesting thing to acquire new knowledge in terms of how these things work out. in your examinations also, I don't think so there's going to be such a complicated way to for you to explain, or they will ask you to explain theories. Understand 2, 3, 4 salient points of the classical economic theory. Similarly, each unit that we go, understand or remember 2, 3, 4 points that you should be enough for you to answer an examination. But for a larger understanding of migration and diaspora, one needs to understand labor and economics and how, and these are the key reasons why labor moves or why migration happens. Have a nice weekend. Have a nice week. I'll see you next Saturday, same time. Bye, guys.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, sir.
Bye, guys.